Hey, welcome back, Casibang's crew. Welcome to Unit 8, Clinical Psychology. We are going to talk about mental disorders, and we're going to talk about therapy, so how to treat those mental disorders. First thing that I want to mention to you is that we are going to be talking about some specific mental disorders. There are quite a few mental disorders that College Board wants you to be aware of. We are going to talk about symptoms. We're going to talk about theories as to why different perspectives believe that you suffer with these different mental disorders. What I want to caution you about is that we're probably going to talk about some mental illnesses that you might be familiar with, you might be suffering from, you might be have family members or friends that are suffering from some of these mental illnesses. So I want you guys to take it very seriously. We're not going to be joking around about mental illnesses. We are not going to be making light of mental illnesses because you don't know what the person sitting next to you is dealing with. Okay, so it is a very, very serious issue and not something that we are going to make light of in this class. I just want to start with that to make sure that everyone is aware. Also, if we're doing an activity or something in class that hits a little bit too close to home and you feel like you need to take a step out of class, please feel free to take a step out of class. Make eye contact with me. Just walk, walk out so that I am aware that you're okay. But don't feel uncomfortable in class because some of these things that we're going to talk about might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so the first group of mental illnesses that we're going to talk about are the anxiety disorders. So here on the screen, you have our learning objective. So discuss the major diagnostic categories, including anxiety and somatoform disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and dissociative disorders, and their corresponding symptoms. So over the next 5 or so videos in the next week and a half or so, we will be going through all of these different categories. Excuse me. Okay, so anxiety disorders. So here are a couple of things that are necessary in order to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Okay, so the disorder or the symptoms need to last at least 6 months before you can be diagnosed. They need to involve a disproportionate fear response relative to the actual danger posed. So you have to be showing a lot more fear than the average citizen. And then the person has to demonstrate maladaptive behaviors to avoid object or the situation. So remember 2 days ago when Ms. Rowlands talked about the 4 things that are necessary for your behavior to be considered abnormal. Okay? And maladaptive was one of those things. So you have to be doing things that are adversely affecting your life in order to avoid the object or the situation, whatever is causing you anxiety. All right, the first disorder that we're going to talk about is generalized anxiety disorder. Sometimes this is abbreviated to GAD, so make sure that you're aware of that. Put that in your notes, okay? So a person is tense, apprehensive, in a constant state of autonomic nervous system arousal. They worry constantly about many, many different issues. Physical symptoms, so at least 3 of the following symptoms have to be present, and at least one of these symptoms has to be present for at least 6 months, like I said previously. So agitation, loss of energy, muscle tension, difficulty focusing, and difficulty sleeping. So generalized anxiety disorder is just when there isn't one specific event or one specific activity or one specific object that causes you a fear response. It is that there are many different things that cause that fear response in you, and that would be considered generalized anxiety. Our second disorder is panic disorder. These can include panic attacks. Okay, so a panic attack is the sudden, unexpected, intense fear response during which anxiety rapidly escalates within minutes. And I'm going to show you a couple of videos that kind of show this panic attack. Now, just because you have one panic attack does not mean that you will be diagnosed with panic disorder. So you have to understand that. So panic disorder requires repeated, so many panic attacks, and at least 4 of the following symptoms: rapid heartbeat, sweating, shaking, shortness of breath, choking sensation, chest pain, nausea or gastrointestinal distress, loss of balance or feeling faint or lightheaded, fear of losing control, fear of dying. Okay, so any of those symptoms could be experienced while you're having a panic attack. And like I said, just because you've had one panic attack doesn't mean that you would be diagnosed with panic disorder. This is a repeated, lengthy situation before you would actually be diagnosed with panic disorder. All right, number 3 are specific phobias. So you guys have heard about these. A lot of people talk about having phobias for certain things. So it's a disproportionate fear response to a specific object or a specific situation. The fear response is almost always immediately elicited by the presence of the phobic object or situation. So for example, common phobias that we see: a phobia of animals, okay, snakes and spiders being the most common ones. A phobia for substances, so blood, germs, okay, that's a big one too. And then a phobia for situations, so being afraid of heights, okay, that is a very common one. Specific phobias are diagnosed more often in females than they are in males. So I want you to stop for just a second. Pause the video after I ask this question. Why do you think it is that specific phobias are diagnosed more often in females than in males? Okay, I want you to think about it for a second. Why do you think it is that it's diagnosed more often in females than in males? All right, so number 4, our 4th mental illness in the anxiety category is social anxiety disorder. So this is a fear of failing or being embarrassed in public. So for example, stage fright, being afraid of speaking in public, fear of crowds or fear of strangers, fear of meeting new people, fear of eating in public. Right, this social anxiety disorder is equally diagnosed in males and in females. And then number 5, the last one that we're going to talk about in this particular category is agoraphobia. So this is a significant anxiety about at least 2 of the following scenarios, at least, okay? Utilizing public transportation, being in open spaces, being in enclosed spaces, like being trapped in an enclosed space, being in a crowd, being alone outside your home. Okay, so because you have a significant anxiety about 2 of those things, you completely avoid those situations. And the result of you avoiding those situations is usually you cannot leave your house. Okay, so normally when you hear about people who are agoraphobic, or if you've seen it in social media, in movies, or in TV, or if you know someone who's agoraphobic, generally the biggest symptom that's most well known is they can't leave their house. Okay, well, the actual symptom is not that they can't leave their house. The symptom is that they're afraid of what will happen if they do leave their house. Okay, the house is the safe spot. It's the home base. I know I'm safe here. I know none of these other things, okay, none of these other things are going to happen to me if I just stay home. Okay, again, this fear response has to last at least 6 months to be diagnosed with agoraphobia. Okay, this is something we're going to do in class tomorrow. All right, so on to the next learning objective. So College Board wants you to be able to evaluate the strengths and limitations of various approaches to explaining psychological disorders. The medical model, the psychoanalytical, humanistic, cognitive, biological, and sociocultural. So think back to the last unit in personality when we talked about psychoanalytical, humanistic, cognitive, sociocultural. We talked about those things. And then think back to, August and September when you were first introduced to these perspectives in psychology. So now we're going to be looking at these perspectives, and we're going to be looking at how a therapist from this particular perspective would say that, or the reasons behind why you would be diagnosed with this particular mental disorder. So let's take all mental disorders as a whole for right now. Okay, so biological perspective. Biological perspective would say that mental disorders are a physical disease, just like COVID, just like cancer, just like heart disease. So it would, or could be brain abnormalities. It could be chemical imbalances in your body. It could be something that is resulting from birth difficulties, or it could be something that is inherited. But biological perspective says that there's something going on in your body that is causing this mental illness. The psychodynamic perspective, remember our friend Sigmund Freud, he would say that it's unconscious conflicts and drives. He might even say that there's some sort of early childhood trauma that is causing your mental illness. Freud in particular said if you repressed a memory, that eventually that memory would try to come out. And while it was trying to push to the surface, that's when you would start experiencing anxiety or those types of things. Our cognitive perspective would say that there is something wrong with your thinking and your thought process, your problem-solving ability. And that's what needs to be fixed in order to fix your mental illness. The behavioral perspective, remember learning theory, operant conditioning, and classical conditioning. So the behavioral perspective would say that you learned maladaptive patterns of behavior through being reinforced. And then the sociocultural perspective says that our culture that we belong to is important in influencing how mental illnesses or mental disorders are developed. There are specific mental illnesses that we'll talk about that we see in larger proportions in certain cultures than we do in other cultures. So one of those examples is something that we've talked about already, the eating disorders. So anorexia and bulimia, much higher instances of those disorders in North America and westernized Europe. So why is it that there are higher instances in those areas than there are in, the continent of Africa or in the Asian countries? Now let's take a look at anxiety disorders specifically, and we're going to look at some of the different perspectives and what they say about anxiety disorders in particular. Okay, so the learning perspective. So this is our behavioral perspective. Remember that, behavioral. So they are saying that you have learned these fear responses, okay? Or you have been conditioned to be fearful of certain things. So there's a couple of things that they say. Think back to our learning unit, okay? These should come back to you. Stimulus generalization. Okay, so people that are attacked by a fierce dog become afraid of all dogs. So that's that idea that once you become conditioned to one thing, it can generalize to other things that are similar. So if you were chased and bitten by a big dog when you were a kid, then you may have a fear of all dogs, not just big dogs, and not just that, specific Doberman Pinscher or whatever bit you. I say Doberman Pinscher because that happened to me when I was a kid. Reinforcement, okay? So avoiding and escaping the stimulus that causes fear helps to maintain that feeling. So I think back in the learning unit, we talked about if there is a kid in school that bullies you, so you decide to take a different path from your second period to your third period to avoid your bully. Well, so that's just reinforcing your fear of that bully by avoiding them, by taking a different pathway through the school. You are avoiding and you are escaping that stimulus that causes you fear. And the more that you do that, the more you are just reinforcing that particular fear. The other thing the learning perspective says is observational learning. Okay, so we are could be observing other people's fear responses. So that could be influencing our own fear response. I do not like spiders at all. I don't think I have a phobia against spiders, but I really, really, really don't like them. So much so that I will call someone else into the room to kill the spider for me. And now my oldest son, my 20-year-old Marine, doesn't like spiders either. And when I call him in to kill him, he's like, oh, why do I have to kill it? And I feel like I taught him that because I've been that way, ever since he's been around, I've been that way. So I feel like through observational learning, he learned to be afraid of spiders as well. It sort of makes me feel guilty a little bit. All right, the biological perspective would say that anxiety disorders could be genetic. They are working on this anxiety gene that triggers the levels of serotonin. So remember, back to biology, serotonin is our happy neurotransmitter. Okay. There's also genes that interfere with glutamate, okay? Again, another neurotransmitter that we talked about back in the bio unit. So there's a lot of studies that are going on right now genetically to see if there are certain things that are in our genes that are passed down from our parents that might make us more susceptible to some of these anxiety disorders. And then also biology, our brain. So over arousal in specific brain areas that are involved with impulse control and habitual behaviors are shown in people that suffer with anxiety. Specifically, anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors actions and checks for errors. And then, of course, our amygdala, which is those high emotions like fear. And then the last one that we'll talk about today are cognitive psychologists. So our cognitive psychologists believe that excess anxiety comes from illogical or irrational thought processes. So there are 4 specific ones that they mention as illogical or irrational. First one is magnification. Okay, magnification. This is our tendency to interpret situations as way more dangerous, harmful, or important than they really actually are. Think of like a magnifying glass, okay? You're making it bigger, you're making it larger than it really is. All or nothing thinking. So all or nothing is literally what it is. The tendency to believe that your performance has to be absolutely spot on, 100% perfect, or you're a total failure, okay? All or nothing thinking. Which I see a lot of times in students, right? If you don't get an A, then it's failure. If you don't get 100, then you're failing, right? There's no in between there. Overgeneralization. So interpreting a single negative event as this never-ending pattern of defeat and failure. So you failed one test. Oh, forget it. I'm gonna fail. I might as well just drop out of school because I'm gonna fail out of school. Right? It's only one test out of many, right? That overgeneralization. I failed one test, forget it, I'm never going to get math, or I'm never going to get physics, or whatever. And then minimization, okay? To minimize your successes. So this tendency to give little or no importance to your successes or to anything positive that happens to you, okay? It's like you want to see yourself in the negative, in the failure, or in the lowest possible low. So anytime anything good actually happens to you, you minimize it. Maybe you attribute it to luck or to something else, not your own doing, not your own work. Okay, so that idea of minimization. Okay, so that is it for the anxiety disorders. Please, please, please make sure that you write down your questions. I'd be happy to answer anything in class tomorrow because I know a lot of these are going to hit home for a lot of you in these next couple videos. Okay, I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.